You know, usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there is this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like you want a clear answer.
Yeah, you can think of it almost like engineering. If you say, fall off a ladder and break your arm, you go to the hospital,
Sure.
and the doctor puts you in front of an x-ray machine, and well, a few minutes later, you are looking at a screen, you see the black background, the white image of the bone, and that jagged line where the break happened.
It is undeniable.
Right. The doctor just points right at it and says, there it is. There's the problem.
The situation is completely binary. I mean, it is either broken or it is not broken.
Yes, it is clean. It is visible. And honestly, there is a lot of comfort in that. We love it when things can be easily categorized, when we can point to a physical cause for our pain.
Oh, absolutely.
But then you step away from the physical body and you step into the world of human desire. You step into our constant, exhausting craving for more. And suddenly, that clean, binary x-ray machine is completely shattered.
It really is.
We are left looking at a diagnostic landscape that is incredibly murky. It is filled with hidden anxieties, silent comparisons, and, a low-grade hum of panic that we cannot quite identify.
That hum of panic is everywhere.
It really is. So, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today we are bringing you a deep dive into an issue that touches the daily reality of every single one of us. We are taking an extensive look at one single staggering biblical passage, which is 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 8.
It is a text that completely overturns the ordinary arithmetic of fallen humanity. I mean, it takes the mathematical equations we use to calculate our worth and turns them completely upside down.
We are building today's discussion on two highly detailed theological texts that you provided. Those are The Quiet Wealth of Godliness and The Sufficiency of Godliness.
Yes, those are our primary sources.
And our mission for this deep dive is clear from the outset. We are setting out to redefine what true gain actually looks like.
Which is so contrary to our culture.
Oh, completely. The modern world has a very specific metric for success. It measures victory by accumulation. More money in the bank, more status in your career, more security in your investments.
Going to war.
Right. But the Apostle Paul steps into that framework and offers a radical countercultural arithmetic. He argues that godliness, when coupled with contentment, is the greatest possible profit.
That is a staggering claim when you pause to consider its implications. It completely reorients the human value system. It shifts the center of gravity away from what we can hold in our hands to the state of our souls before the living God.
I want to ask you, the listener, a direct question before we go any further. Have you ever felt that exhausting existential panic of constantly needing more?
I think we all have.
You know the feeling. You wake up, you check your phone, you look at your bank balance, you see what your peers are doing online, and there is this creeping anxiety that you are falling behind.
Yeah, that comparison trap.
You feel like your savings are inadequate, that your living space is too small, that your social status is entirely unsecured. Well, today's deep dive offers a way out of that endless, frantic marketplace. It offers a genuine exit strategy from the sheer exhaustion of the modern hustle.
To comprehend Paul's striking words, we must first look at the volatile environment in which they were written. I mean, we cannot possibly understand the cure he is offering without first diagnosing the specific disease plaguing the first century church. Context is everything here.
Okay, let's unpack this. Set the scene for me. What kind of world is Timothy actually living in when he receives this letter? We're talking roughly AD 62 to 64 during the reign of the Roman Emperor Nero, right?
Yes, that is the time frame. The setting is the city of Ephesus. And we need to understand that Ephesus was not some quiet, out-of-the-way, dusty little village.
Right.
It was a roaring hub of international commerce. It was the absolute crown jewel of the Roman province of Asia Minor. It sat at the intersection of major trade routes, meaning wealth from all over the known world was constantly flowing through its streets.
So it was basically the Wall Street of the ancient world.
Very much so.
Oh, yeah.
It was a metropolis where massive wealth and pagan worship were completely intertwined. The skyline of the city was dominated by the Temple of Artemis.
Which was huge, right?
Oh, massive. This structure was so large, so visually overwhelming, that it was considered one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It had over 100 massive marble columns, and many of them were covered in gold and jewels.
Wow.
But the temple was not just a religious site where people went to sing hymns. It functioned as the primary bank of Asia Minor.
Wait, really? The temple was a bank?
Yes, a literal bank. Kings, emperors, incredibly wealthy merchants, and private citizens deposited their massive fortunes there.
Why there?
Well, they believed that the goddess Artemis would protect their assets from thieves. So you have this massive financial institution operating under the guise of pagan religion.
I always try to picture the intimidating reality of this for a young leader. Like, I picture the Temple of Artemis as this massive, gleaming, modern offshore tax haven fused together with a high-end mega mall and a sprawling casino.
That is a great visual.
It was this massive economic machine running on superstition and greed, and the local culture equated material prosperity directly with divine favor, right? If you had a lot of wealth, the gods were obviously smiling on you.
That was the prevailing cultural mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And into this hyper-commercialized, visually stunning space, false teachers infiltrated the Christian church.
Here we go.
They recognized the economic potential of the religious market in Ephesus,
Right.
and they essentially created an early ancient version of the prosperity gospel.
Right.
They treated the Christian religion as a commercial enterprise.
Right.
Their goal was to attract affluent, wealthy patrons and make a massive profit off of spiritual teaching.
So they were monetizing the gospel.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we see that this was not a simple budgeting issue within the church. It was the idolatry of temporal security. The false teachers were functioning as religious entrepreneurs.
Wow.
They were bartering a corrupted version of the gospel to satisfy unregenerate carnal desires. They realized they could take Christian vocabulary, blend it with popular philosophy that appealed to the wealthy elite, demand exorbitant speaking fees, and build a highly lucrative personal business.
And Timothy, who is Paul's delegate in Ephesus, was young. The sources point out he was naturally timid. He struggled with physical ailments.
Yes, he had a rough time.
And this young guy was tasked with stopping these slick, well-funded mercenary clerics. Think about the pressure on him. Imagine being a young pastor, standing up in front of that cultural juggernaut, looking at the Temple of Artemis in the background and telling the people, no, this entire economic and religious machine has it all wrong.
The psychological pressure would have been immense. The metric for success in Ephesus was the size of your wallet and the social status of your followers. The heretics asserted that godliness is a means of financial advancement.
Right.
They entirely commodified the faith. They turned the local church into a marketplace.
Since the false teachers measured ministerial success by financial profit, Paul had to do something drastic in his letter. He executes a dramatic rhetorical pivot. He takes their own commercial vocabulary, the very words they use to scam the church, and he hijacks them to present a superior truth.
Yes, the grammar of the text is incredibly deliberate. Paul starts verse 6 with a contrast particle. The Greek word is de, which is translated as but or now.
Okay.
It's a calculated pivot. It acts like a massive stop sign on a busy highway. Paul counters their mercenary, profit-driven mindset with absolute reality. He writes, but godliness with contentment is great gain.
He flips.
It takes their absolute favorite category, the category of gain, and redefines it according to God's kingdom.
Let's look closely at those specific words, because this is where the sources get incredibly detailed. Paul starts with godliness. The texts tell us this is the Greek word euspia. From what I understand, this is not just academic orthodoxy.
Not at all.
It is not just sitting in a room, passing a written exam on theological facts and getting a certificate.
No, it is far more active than that. Euspia refers to reverent conduct, holy awe, and a life entirely ordered by divine truth.
So it is lived out.
Yes, it is the exact opposite of a sterile mechanical religion. It is an active, practical, breathing reverence toward the living God. The false teachers had a form of religious activity, absolutely. But they used their religious activity as a financial instrument.
Yeah, treating it like a stock option.
They were leveraging theology for cash.
Yeah.
True euspia, on the other hand, worships God for who he is in his glorious nature, not for the earthly payouts he might provide.
So it is loving God, not just loving the things God can drop into your lap. And then Paul pairs that act of reverence with contentment. The sources mention the Greek word here is autarkia.
What's fascinating here is the massive cultural baggage attached to that specific word in the first century. Paul knew what he was doing by using it. Stoic philosophers like Seneca and Epictetus used autarkia all the time.
Right, I have heard of them.
It was a major buzzword in their teachings. They used it to describe absolute self-sufficiency.
Like a stoic stiff upper lip kind of thing?
Yes, but taken to an extreme. The Stoics taught that a wise person achieves this state of contentment through sheer unbending willpower. The goal was to render yourself completely independent of all external circumstances.
Oh, wow.
If you lost your wealth, your health, or even your family, you were supposed to retreat into your own mind and find total autonomy. It was a very proud humanistic fortitude. It essentially said, I need nothing outside of my own rational mind.
But Paul redefines it entirely, right? He's not telling Timothy to just become a Stoic and grit his teeth through the pain.
He redefines it completely. For the Apostle Paul, this contentment is not autonomous self-mastery. It is Christ's sufficiency. It is the act of resting completely in God's sovereign providence. The believer has enough because God is enough, and because every appointed circumstance, whether it is a season of plenty or a season of famine, is governed by his infinite wisdom.
So it is a dependent sufficiency, not a proud autonomy. You are relying entirely on another person, the person of God.
Precisely.
Then we hit the word gain, or profit, which is perismos. The sources point out this is a rare business term. It denotes an income stream or a lucrative business enterprise.
Which is very telling.
Paul deliberately avoids using standard poetic words for spiritual abundance. He grabs their corporate jargon. He basically uses a venture capitalist term to mock the commercialization of the faith.
He flips their whole script.
Right. He says to the false teachers, you want a profitable enterprise. You want an income stream with high yields. Godliness with contentment is the greatest possible enterprise.
Syntactically, he makes godliness the subject and great gain the predicate. He is not saying godliness is a strategy or a stepping stone to acquire some other, better physical gain. He is stating that the godly life itself, when joined to a contented heart, already possesses the ultimate profit.
Okay, I have to jump in and represent the skeptic here. I want to ask a genuinely challenging question. Because when I hear this stark language, it sounds a little extreme.
Sure, it can come across that way.
Does Paul's use of this language mean Christians are supposed to despise the physical world? Because if godliness is the only true game, should I feel guilty for having a savings account?
That is a fair question.
Should I feel bad for negotiating a decent salary or setting up a retirement fund to take care of my kids? Is Paul calling us to extreme asceticism where we all sell everything and go live in caves?
That is a crucial distinction to make, and it is a common misunderstanding. Paul is absolutely not promoting asceticism.
Okay, good.
In fact, earlier in this very same letter, he condemns false teachers who forbid people to marry or demand that people abstain from certain foods. He is not commanding believers to abandon their earthly vocations or to neglect the practical provision for their households.
So he isn't saying the material world is evil.
No. What he is doing is redefining the asset itself. The actual asset is not what your godliness can buy you in the marketplace. The godliness is the asset.
Oh, that is a great way to phrase it.
A soul that is aligned with God possesses a permanent profit that economic inflation, market crashes, or outright theft cannot possibly touch.
So the issue is not whether a Christian may possess resources. The issue is whether those resources possess the Christian.
Spot on. Contentment is the settled, unshakable conviction that God remains perfectly good when your earthly circumstances are lean, and that his providence remains perfectly wise when your specific desires are denied.
Yeah.
It is the absence of an idolatrous dependence on the outcome of your own frantic effort. When a person is truly aligned with God in holy reverence and satisfied with his sovereign allocation of resources, they achieve a wealth that no earthly treasury, not even the massive temple of Artemis, can match.
So if godliness combined with contentment is the actual tangible asset, how do we prove its value? Well, you have to stress test it.
Yes, you do.
You have to test it against the one single event that audits every human life. That brings us to the undeniable, sobering logic of human mortality. Verse 7 says, "For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out."
The grammar in this specific verse is incredibly striking. The text uses a symmetrical parallelism with two compound verbs.
Let's break those down.
We have eisfru, meaning to bring in, and ekfru, meaning to carry out. This structure creates a perfect symmetrical contrast between our entry into the physical cosmos and our eventual departure from it.
Paul is drawing on a universal anthropological reality that spans all cultures and eras. It directly echoes the Old Testament wisdom literature. When you read this, you immediately think of Job chapter 1, verse 21. "Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return."
Or Ecclesiastes 5, verse 15. It is an undeniable fact.
Yes, death is presented here as the great, impartial auditor of human claims. It brutally strips away the secular illusion of absolute ownership.
Think about the reality of human birth. Every single person begins life completely destitute. They arrive without title, without currency, without property, and without reputation.
There's nothing.
And every single person ends their earthly life under the exact same unyielding prohibition. Absolutely nothing accumulated can cross the boundary of the grave.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? Think about how we talk in our daily lives. Think about how easily, how casually we say things like, my money, my house, my career, my investment portfolio.
We say it constantly.
We speak constantly as though our ownership over these things is independent and permanent. We act like we hold the ultimate deed to our lives. But this verse shatters that illusion. We are temporary stewards. Every single thing we accumulate is on a very short-term lease.
This raises an important question about how we view our entire existence. Recognizing this universal truth creates a massive eschatological sobriety. It produces incredible humility.
For everyone across the board.
Yes. For the affluent person, the person with the large bank account and the multiple properties, it is a stark reality check.
Yeah.
You are just a temporary manager of these assets. They do not belong to you permanently.
Right.
For the poor person, the person struggling to make ends meet, it provides immense, unparalleled comfort. You are not excluded from the only wealth that actually survives the grave.
It levels the playing field completely. Death is the great equalizer. Death does not care about the balance in your checking account. It does not care about your zip code, the brand of clothes you wear, or how many followers you have.
None of it matters.
Whatever you gather between the moment of your birth and the moment of your death remains entirely external to your actual personhood. It cannot accompany you into the final judgment, and it cannot accompany you into glory. You see this all the time. You see estate sales where a person's entire life's accumulation of treasures is sold off for pennies on the dollar on a Saturday morning.
It is sobering to witness.
You never see a U-Haul trailing behind a hearse.
The logic Paul presents is absolutely airtight. Material goods are not inherently evil. The physical world is created by God and is good. But material goods fail completely as foundations for your identity or your hope simply because they do not survive the boundary of death.
Yeah.
To spend a brief, fleeting earthly life frantically accumulating physical assets that must be abandoned at the moment you take your final breath is the height of spiritual and intellectual folly.
Because we cannot take a single piece of currency with us, Paul moves to the next logical step. If we are leaving it all behind, what do we actually need while we are here? He establishes a definitive, radical boundary for what we actually require while living in this temporary physical cosmos.
Yes, verse 8.
Verse 8 says, and having food and clothing, with these we shall be content.
The Greek words used by the apostle here are remarkable for their starkness. He uses diatrophos for sustenance and scapismata for covering or shelter.
Those are pretty specific, right?
They are rare plural terms in the New Testament. Notice that Paul bypasses the common everyday words for bread or garments. He strips human requirements down to the absolute starkest biological elements.
Yeah.
Basic nutrition and basic protection from the elements.
Okay, I have to push back here because reading this in a modern context feels incredibly jarring. Wait, but in a modern context, isn't that horribly irresponsible?
It sounds like it, sure.
If I sit down with my family tonight and tell them, hey, great news, we have some clothes in the closet and dinner on the table, we don't need health insurance, we don't need a retirement fund, we don't need to save for emergencies because Paul says food and covering are enough. If I do that, I'm going to look like a terrible provider.
My family would panic.
They absolutely would panic. How do we square this absolute stripped-down biological baseline with basic modern responsibility?
That is the friction Paul wants us to feel. But we must differentiate between wise stewardship and the idolatry of entitlement. Paul's not telling you to cancel your health insurance or to stop working hard to provide a safe home. Remember, he tells Timothy elsewhere that a man who does not provide for his household has denied the faith. So provision and planning are commanded. What Paul is attacking here is the psychological baseline of our satisfaction. He is attacking the point at which we decide God has failed us.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It is about where we set the threshold for gratitude. It makes me think of packing for a severe wilderness expedition.
That is a great comparison.
If you are climbing a treacherous mountain, you only take the absolute biological necessities in your pack. You take high-calorie food, a thermal layer, and a waterproof shell. That is it.
Anything else is a liability.
Exactly. Carrying a heavy luxury item like, I don't know, a cast iron skillet or a massive canvas tent would completely exhaust you. It would distract you from the mission of the climb and put your actual survival at risk. Paul is stripping the Christian life down to expedition weight.
That is an excellent analogy. And look at the specific verb Paul uses for contentment in this verse. The word is arkastesontha. Paul uses a fascinating grammatical structure here. It is a future passive indicative form. It carries an imperial imperatival force.
Explain that for those of us who aren't Greek scholars. What does an imperatival force actually mean for the reader?
It means Paul does not say, we might be content if things go well, or, we should really try our best to be content. The way it is written in the original language is practically a royal decree. It is a binding covenantal guarantee. He says, we shall be content.
It is not a polite suggestion from a life coach.
No, it establishes a definitive hard boundary. What's fascinating here is how our fallen sinful desire actually operates in real time. Our fallen nature quickly turns daily gifts into entitlements, and then it turns those entitlements into accusations against God.
Wow, that is a sharp progression.
When we have more than the baseline, we start expecting that surplus as a fundamental human right. And when we lose that surplus, we do not just feel sad, we actually accuse God of failing us. By setting the required threshold at basic biological survival, Paul forcibly arrests the endless expansion of our carnal desire.
We see this entitlement all the time. We say we just need the basics, but let the Wi-Fi go out in the house for 20 minutes and suddenly we act like we are in a high-stakes survival situation on a deserted island.
We completely lose perspective.
We panic, we get angry, we feel wronged. But this verse provides a sharp diagnostic tool. If you have a meal on the table tonight and clothes on your back today, God has thoroughly met the threshold of his faithfulness for that 24-hour period.
Absolutely.
Every single meal and every single garment becomes tangible, undeniable evidence that the Creator has not abandoned his creature. But let's be totally honest with each other. It is completely impossible to achieve this radical contentment through Stoic willpower or massive budget cuts. You cannot just spreadsheet your way into this kind of staggering peace.
You really cannot.
You can't just delete the Amazon app from your phone and suddenly attain spiritual enlightenment.
Human resolve is entirely insufficient to meet this rigorous standard. The fallen human mind is in a state of chronic, underlying panic regarding its own vulnerability in a hostile world. We constantly feel exposed.
We always feel like we are one disaster away from ruin.
Yes. To find the actual source of this supernatural contentment, the source material demands we look outside ourselves. We must look at the only person who flawlessly embodied this standard in human history.
We have to look at the Christological reality. Jesus Christ is the ultimate flawless fulfillment of both eusebeia and autarkia. He is the perfect embodiment of active godliness and complete contentment.
The theological texts we are referencing point heavily to the Westminster Shorter Catechism, question 27. That specific question speaks of Christ's state of humiliation. Think about the sheer magnitude of this historical reality.
It is hard to even wrap our minds around it.
The eternal Son of God, who possessed the infinite unsearchable riches of the cosmos, willingly stripped himself of his visible glory. He entered the physical world with absolutely nothing. He was not born in a palace. He was laid in a borrowed feeding trough for animals.
A manger.
Yes. During his earthly ministry, he stated clearly that foxes have holes and birds have nests, but the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head.
He owned essentially nothing, and we see this tested right at the beginning of his ministry. In the wilderness, Satan offered him the literal kingdoms of the world in all their glory. It was a massive temptation.
The ultimate shortcut.
Right, it was a shortcut to massive earthly gain without having to endure the suffering of the cross. But Christ demonstrated perfect, unbroken contentment. He rejected the offer entirely, trusting the Father's sovereign allocation of suffering and glory. He would not even turn the desert stones into bread to satisfy his own agonizing physical hunger outside of the Father's specific will.
This is a critical point that the sources make. His life was not just an inspiring example of simple living. He wasn't just modeling a minimalist lifestyle for us to copy.
Like an ancient Marie Kondo.
Right, no. It was active, representative obedience. He satisfied the absolute demands of the moral law, the demand for perfect contentment on behalf of his people. The human race is heavily plagued by covetousness. We are defined by our constant daily violations of the 10th commandment. We constantly look at our neighbor and desire what is not ours.
We want their house, their spouse, their job, their vacation, their metabolism. We are constantly coveting. And on the cross, Christ bore the divine wrath due to his people for those exact violations.
He was stripped naked by the Roman soldiers, experiencing the ultimate physical and social deprivation. He hung there in agony, paying the absolute penalty for our frantic grasping, our endless greed, and our ungrateful complaints.
Through union with Christ, believers receive full justification and adoption into the family of God. Contentment, therefore, is a supernatural fruit of this union. It is not an exercise in white-knuckling your desires.
It is not about gritting your teeth and suppressing your wish for a nicer car.
No. When the soul realizes it actually possesses the creator of the universe, the psychological panic of material insecurity begins to dissolve.
That is incredibly liberating for you listening right now. We aren't just handing you a heavy moralistic checklist today. We aren't saying, listen to this deep dive and just try harder to be happy with less.
That would just be another form of exhausting, crushing performance.
Our daily failures and contentment have been entirely paid for. We are united to the Savior who possessed nothing on earth, yet trusted the Father perfectly.
The gospel assures believers of their permanent adoption as co-heirs with Christ. You possess a spiritual treasure that cannot fade, cannot rust, and cannot be stolen.
The logic is argued perfectly by Paul in another letter. He writes, "If the Father did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also graciously give us all things? He will faithfully provide everything biologically and spiritually necessary for your appointed service on this earth."
The cross proves historically that God has not forgotten his people, and the physical resurrection proves that temporal earthly loss cannot destroy their eternal future.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we have to take this robust, massive theology out of the first century and apply it directly to the glaring idolatries of our modern cultural moment.
We are not dealing with the Temple of Artemis today, but we are absolutely facing our own versions of the Ephesian marketplace.
The texts explicitly confront the modern prosperity gospel. This is the widespread phenomenon of televangelists and megachurch leaders promising physical luxury, perfect health, and massive financial breakthroughs in direct exchange for faith and monetary donations.
It is a direct, undeniable resurrection of the ancient Ephesian heresy. It treats God as a cosmic slot machine, a mechanism to unlock material wealth.
It is the exact same scam, just broadcast in high definition. And it isn't just the blatant prosperity preachers on late-night television asking you to sow a seed of $1,000.
Right, it sneaks in quietly.
The sources also call out a much more subtle issue, which is seeker-sensitive pragmatism. This is the practice of treating the local church as a consumer enterprise. It is driven entirely by secular marketing metrics.
You measure the success of a ministry by the size of the building, the size of the annual budget, and audience retention rates, rather than the slow, quiet cultivation of holiness and contentment in the congregation.
It creates a highly transactional religion. It turns attendees into consumers and pastors into religious CEOs. But to really grasp the contemporary application of Paul's warning, we have to look at the crushing economic reality of our current culture. One of the texts highlights a staggering, sobering statistic.
What is it?
The average U.S. household carries over $10,489 in high-interest consumer credit card debt.
Over $10,000 in revolving high-interest debt. That is an enormous burden. That is a weight sitting on the chest of millions of families every single time they try to sleep.
This specific debt is not just a neutral economic indicator. It is a blazing symptom of a severe spiritual disease. It is literal enslavement driven by rampant discontentment. As the source describes it so accurately and painfully, it is the act of buying things we do not need with money we do not have to impress people we do not even like.
That phrase hits so hard. Buying things we don't need with money we don't have to impress people we don't like. That is the modern equivalent of the snare, the trap that Paul warns Timothy about.
It is a trap we build for ourselves.
We willingly mortgage our own futures and the futures of our children simply to maintain a fragile illusion of security and status in the present moment.
Practical application of Paul's teaching here calls for deliberate, sometimes painful action. It requires a highly disciplined thanksgiving for the ordinary, boring mercies of daily life.
The everyday stuff.
Yes. It requires a generous, open-handed distribution of any financial surplus we might have. And crucially, it frames systematic debt reduction as an actual act of spiritual worship.
That is a fascinating way to view it.
Paying down your credit card debt, refusing to take on more consumer loans, is a physical rejection of the frantic consumerism that the surrounding culture demands of you.
I want you to stop right now and evaluate your own financial habits and the silent internal anxieties attached to them. Are you quietly practicing a modest middle-class version of the prosperity gospel?
We might easily reject the guys on television asking for private jets, but do we secretly expect that our daily obedience to God should yield a steady career progression, a pristine, fully funded retirement account, or unquestioned respect from our neighbors?
And the diagnostic question follows. When those expected things are withheld by God's providence, does your disappointment harden into a bitter accusation against God?
This raises an important question. The true test of our theology is not what we cheerfully affirm in a written doctrinal statement on a Sunday morning. The true test is what specific loss makes us believe that God is no longer good.
If you lose your job tomorrow, or the housing market completely crashes, or you are forced to downsize your home and move to a smaller neighborhood, does your internal peace evaporate? If it does, you might have attached your peace to the physical provision rather than the unseen provider.
That is a hard pill to swallow, but it is vital to consider how the visible church can stand as a genuine, countercultural witness in today's world. In a society that is completely obsessed with acquisition, upgrades, and luxury, the goal is a community characterized by radical, joyful simplicity.
A congregation that genuinely cares for those who lack biological necessities, ensuring no one goes without food or shelter, while simultaneously resting completely in divine providence.
Imagine a community where the wealthy members are fiercely humble and wildly generous, refusing to flaunt their status, and the poorer members possess a quiet, unshakable dignity, entirely free from the shame and stigma the outside culture tries to put on them.
That is a community that testifies loudly that their future is secured by the living God, not by a fluctuating stock portfolio or the current interest rates.
The absolute peace of that specific community becomes a glaring, undeniable witness to the outside world. It proclaims the total sufficiency of God far louder and far more effectively than any modern marketing strategy ever could.
Let's bring this all together. We have covered massive ground today. We started in the volatile Ephesian marketplace, a roaring, intimidating hub of commerce and pagan religion, where false teachers actively tried to turn godliness into a profitable financial transaction.
Paul countered that massive lie by hijacking their corporate vocabulary, stating definitively that true godliness, when joined with contentment, is the actual greatest possible gain.
He grounded that theological reality in the stark, undeniable logic of human mortality. We brought absolutely nothing into this physical world, and it is a biological certainty that we will carry absolutely nothing out.
Therefore, Paul establishes a firm biological baseline of basic food and basic shelter, forcibly arresting our runaway, entitled desires.
And we found the ability to actually live this out, not in our own failing willpower or our attempts at Stoic minimalism, but exclusively in the Christological reality. Christ's perfect representative obedience, his willing humiliation in the incarnation, and his substitutionary death on the cross completely free us from the penalty of our endless covetousness.
His work unites us permanently to the Creator himself, which frees us to actively smash the modern idols in our own lives. We can boldly reject the modern prosperity gospel. We can reject consumer-driven pragmatic church models, and we can aggressively tackle our own personal consumer debt and financial anxiety, knowing with absolute certainty that our true eternal wealth is totally secure in Christ.
As we wrap up this extensive deep dive today, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. We spent a lot of time dissecting verse 7, the absolute, unbroken certainty that we can carry zero material possessions out of this physical world.
Death is the great impartial auditor.
But if we cannot take our money, our houses, our cars, or our corporate titles with us, what does actually survive the grave?
It is a clarifying, piercing question that forces us to evaluate every single decision we make.
If you think about it intensely, perhaps the only true investments we ever make in this life, the only things that actually cross that boundary line of death, are the physical resources we freely give away to relieve the suffering of others, the truth we patiently instill in the minds of the next generation, and the quiet, holy character formed in our own souls by the Spirit of God. Thank you for joining us on Reformed Thinking. Take a hard, honest look at your own ledger this week and ask yourself how you define your gain.